And I think my tics do still correspond with major stressors in my life. That's something that's entirely gone away. But I think once I was able to one, put in certain practices that people always talk about, like yoga and meditation as like a grounding practice for myself. But I think on a larger level, once I grew in terms of my confidence, both communicating about my tics to others to let them know what was going on with me, and also understood that what was happening in this one moment wasn't the end all be all. I was able to detach a little bit and perform my best because my worth wasn't equated with what was being put in front of me.
Welcome to the Uptick, brought to you by the New Jersey Center for Tourette Syndrome and Associated Disorders, empowering children and adults through education, advocacy, and research by sharing the stories and experiences relevant to the TS community.
Hello and welcome back to the Uptick. Today, I am speaking with Jenna Smith, a senior at Duke University, originally from Scotch Plains, New Jersey. Jenna will be graduating this May with a major in International Comparative Studies and a minor in Journalism and Media. She was recently among the 32 recipients selected for the Rhodes Scholarship, where she will be going to the University of Oxford in the UK next year for an all expenses paid 2 years of study. Jenna, it's great having you on the Uptick, and I want to first just congratulate you on getting the Rhodes Scholarship. It's a tremendous achievement and opportunity. For our listeners who aren't as familiar with it, she had to be nominated by the university, and then you were chosen from among 865 applicants from across the country and then more from around the world. Can you walk us through that moment you found out you got the scholarship and what your reaction was?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for the congratulations. I really appreciate
Of
it. It's
course.
been a very exciting couple months. I remember getting the way that they announce it is really interesting because they have us all in a room and then they sort of tell us together who among us got the scholarship. So they bring us in, the person announces it, and I think my face, I think all the blood left my body. I was just stunned. It was so insane. And I gave hugs to all the amazing finalists I met that weekend. I met some really, really cool people. And then once everybody trickled out, I panicked and I called my mother and my father, and my dad starts doing laps around the house and my mom's crying. It was a big
Got to work off that energy somehow. It's like getting into college or Duke or something all over again. That excitement of just you made a great milestone here, and you're going to do great things with that. So my understanding is you get to go to Oxford now and take some courses in your area of study. Do you know what those courses will be or what your program will be in?
Yes, I'm in the process of applying right now. So the plan is Oxford in the fall. So I'm interested in criminology and criminal justice or public policy are my two main focuses. So those are the specific courses I'm looking at, but I'm pretty open. I think just the long-term goal is law school and then doing work in the criminal legal landscape. So any substantive education that helps me get to that goal is it's really the plan.
Love that. It sounds like you've always been on that lawyer track. Is that the case?
Kind of, yeah. I don't know if you can tell from I just was a very, very nerdy kid. So I just spent my entire, I want to say middle school, really into reading Howard Zinn books, like A People's History of the Supreme Court. I had a very weird, very intense relationship with. I love. So I remember at the time, I think sort of learning about these mechanisms that had really been used to disadvantage my communities, but I also had this immense faith in using them to create change. And that's a whole other conversation, another podcast about how that faith and belief in our current institutions has evolved. But at the time, that was something that was really, really grounded in. So I think after that, I focused on learning more about those things through high school, doing mock trial and ethics bowl and things like that. I had a really amazing legally and ethics focused programming in my high school education. And when I got to Duke, I really dove into the focus on the criminal legal work. So I got to get involved with this amazing organization called Restorative Justice Durham here, where Duke University is based. And I got involved with this another amazing organization called the Duke Justice Project, and through a lot of really amazing connections and community members who welcomed me into the reentry landscape around here and doing that kind of work, I just learned more and more about it. And here we are looking at our next educational journey.
Look at that. No, I love it. Another journey and another opportunity here. And I understand from our last talk that some of your interest in this was sparked by some documentary video journalism you did in the Deep South. Do you want to speak to that some?
Yeah, absolutely. So part of the reason why I ended up at Duke University is I was really privileged. I got this scholarship called the Robertson. So the Robertson is a scholarship that funds honestly a similar number of kids as the Rhodes, like around like 30 to 35 kids per year. Half of them go to Duke and half of them go to UNC Chapel Hill. And as part of that programming, like the founder of the Robertson is really rooted in the American South. So the summer after your freshman year, you get sent to a different community in the South. So it can be Tarboro, North Carolina. We have some folks in Kentucky, some folks in Mississippi, and you're doing a lot of like service oriented work. And while like service has always been something that's been very grounded in me and my family, like when they told me I was going to Mississippi, I think I started kicking and screaming. It's like, I'm not going because of all this history that I'd known about and grown up pretty steeped in of the American South. My family migrated and really like hadn't looked back since. So it was something that I just wasn't super excited about. And then I moved there and absolutely fell in love with it, to be quite honest. The community,
Wow.
the culture, and how dedicated people are to the history and the land. And I was privileged enough to work on this documentary project where I got to interview, I think it was like between 9 to 10 really incredible women who were change makers and the descendants of folks who were working in the civil rights era. So I got to talk to Miss Rena Evers Everett, who's the daughter of Medgar and Murley Evers, who have an incredible history and like seeing the civil rights movement. Just I had the most amazing privileged summer. And from there I realized the work that I was really focused on in the criminal legal sphere, it was best rooted in these sorts of like tight-knit communities. And that's where the most progress can be made, but that's also not where resources are typically allocated. So I think that's sort of become the focus of what I want my career to look like is doing that kind of work in those communities.
I was gonna say that was my next question was it sounds like your plan was or is to return to like Mississippi South or and do some of that restorative justice work in those communities after law school and all of that, of course. But that is that's still kind of your thinking?
Yeah, that's the dream. That's the dream. I still have
That's
to go to law
wonderful.
school and see what that looks like, but that would be the ideal.
Excellent. And then in terms of law school, I know it's a couple of years away, but would your specialty be in like restorative justice? I don't know all the different concentrations there are for law school, but are you able to kind of get into that area you're interested in?
Yeah, I think it depends on where you go to law school, and it depends on like what programs the particular school is really prominent in. As a kid, I was really interested in constitutional law, and now I've had this more restorative justice focus. So I think we'll see what it ends up looking like.
Oh, looking forward to it, and yeah, we'll stay tuned on that. So in the meantime, though, you also have tics and you have Tourette and anxiety and all the other things that make you you. I think so many kids hearing this podcast, you have such an impressive background. You talk about like the being service oriented for your life. Talk about being nerdy, being a high achiever, and I love all that. I think we need more great role models of like just people with Tourette going on to do lots of things, including being excelling academically about like that kid that's sitting just struggling to get through algebra 1 in like middle school or like I remember for me math was always really a challenge and my dad, like God love him, he was an engineer and so he was able to sit down with me if I had questions on my homework or whatever. He was so patient and I even when I was not and I'd be just getting all worked up because it didn't make sense to me and he'd work with me for hours at night on my homework just to make sure I understood the concepts that I was learning and developing. And I'm so blessed that I had him. What would you have to say to someone like that, that is struggling academically? And we can go in a few different directions with this because I know this is a really broad question, but I want to hear some initial thoughts you have on that.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that I definitely relate to, even down to like sitting with dad at like the kitchen table when
Yeah.
we're those math problems. It's interesting. I was doing some reflecting on this morning because that's honestly the root of sort of first of all how I learned about my tics and how prominent they were and were going to be in my life, and sort of taught me a lot about how I was going to approach my academics. Because when I was in 8th grade and studying, I guess that's algebra 1. I can't even remember what class that is
I
at
think
that
it's
point.
around there. Yeah, eighth grade,
Yeah,
number
yeah.
one.
I was really struggling with math, and it's still not my forte to this day. Like that's don't put a problem in front of me. But I remember like I was really, really struggling to the point where I would get like these really intense tic attacks when I was doing my homework. And I continued through high school. I remember I had a tic attack during my AP calculus exam my senior year. So it's not something that completely ever evaporated from my life. But it's something that I don't know in terms of like what I would have known at that time or what I wish I would have known. I'd say first, at least what I needed personally was just to know to not put that much to try to take a little bit of pressure off of myself, which I know feels impossible in the moment when you have all these big goals and these big dreams and you feel like this one thing is the thing that's standing in the way. But I think I was at a point where I was really equating my worth with how I was performing on these exams, how I was doing in school, and I think that really manifested in how frequently I was taking and how prominent my tics were because I was just so sort of bottled up and nervous and terrified that it just sort of manifested in this way. And I think my tics do still correspond with major stressors in my life. That's something that hasn't entirely gone away. But I think once I was able to like one put in certain practices that people always talk about, like yoga and meditation as like a grounding practice for myself. But I think on a larger level, once I grew in terms of my confidence, both communicating about my tics to others to let them know what was going on with me and also understood that what was happening in this one moment wasn't the end all be all. I was able to detach a little bit and perform my best because my worth wasn't equated with what was being put in front of me.
You bring up some interesting points there. The one I'm thinking of is that like being a student in school, especially like a young like a kid, is such a unique place in life to be because all your self-worth, like, it really does feel like it's all about getting the grades. You spend all of your waking day, I went to, like, a traditional learning environment and classroom. I assume you did too. So it was just a lot of sitting at the desk, being quiet, looking straight ahead, listening to the teacher. You go home, you do your homework. Yeah, you got some sports, extracurriculars, and whatnot, but so much of your life and your worth is really just revolving around getting good grades and doing well academically, and it's almost like so if that's something that is a struggle or just, you've got challenges there, barriers there, it really can eat at our self-esteem just because it's not like you've got a job or some other thing that you're possibly getting some of that value and worth from. And I realize there's ways to build that in a kid's life, but with hobbies and stuff. But yeah, I mean, so much of our as just being a kid, so much of your life revolves around school. And I think that's something that kids should be. I remember my parents always says it. They would always say, like, Michael, the real world isn't school. Like, you're gonna have a job and hopefully you're gonna like your job. And you're gonna come home and you're not gonna have homework. It's just gonna be like you're done for the day. You can like work on family, whatever stuff you have going on, home, recreation, hobbies. And like there aren't gonna be exams anymore. There's not gonna be a standardized test. And that concept just felt so foreign to me, like, when I was in 8th grade and, like, 8th grade was also a super stressful year for me and probably the worst my tics have ever been. But yeah, no, as an adult now, I'm 31 and I definitely I feel that. It's like, wow, and if anything now, those days that I just spent my whole time being in school seem so distant and foreign and like I can't even relate to that anymore because I'm now so used to just being an adult. But yeah, your worldview will certainly change. Like to any kids listening to this or parents that are looking for things to tell their kids that are stressing about this. It is hard being a kid and being in class all the time. And I don't think we always acknowledge like why it's why it is so hard. It's that is kind of your life is being in school.
100%. I very much so agree with that. It's interesting you talk about your tics being most prominent in 8th grade. I think it was very similar for me. And when I think back on that time, like even more so than equating your self-worth with like what specific grade you're getting, you're also it's a time in your life where so much of your self-worth is determined by what other people think of you.
Yes, your
So many of
peers and
that.
classmates. Yeah.
Exactly,
Yeah.
because if you're sitting in the back of the classroom, I just remember this so vividly of being so hyper aware of what the kids next to me thought of me, and I'm having this tic I used to have this tic where I'd, like, kick the chair in front of me. I want this
Mhm.
tic to have in middle school so bad. So it's one of those things where you're like you get so hyper aware of how people perceive you that that only increases the stress and increases the nerves, and that's something that is really difficult to navigate and to avoid, but it is something that as you move through life and as the world because it does get bigger, like you're saying, and it does get larger than that one environment, it is something that feels a little bit easier to manage as you continue to move through it.
When did your tics first emerge?
So I started experiencing tics in 4th grade and I got diagnosed in 8th grade. So it was like a
Okay.
very long process because my tics were really prominent. It was actually it became one of those things where my mother and I were like constantly in and out of different doctor's offices. I remember I think maybe around 5th grade I had like this neck tic where I'd like whip my head back really quickly.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that one.
I've been there. Those are painful.
They are, they're really annoying. I went to the doctor, I remember, and they, like, gave me a neck brace. So I was just walking around in a neck brace the whole time, and then I had, like, an arm.
Those are also really uncomfortable, neck
They
bracers.
are.
Yes, I got a concussion when I was 2 years old, and the only thing I, like, remember about it, to the extent a two-year-old can remember anything, is how painful that neck brace was. It was awful. I was like, "Don't make me wear this." Anyway, sorry. I was, like, choking, but Christy, I didn't mean to interrupt with that, but
No,
neck
you
braces
don't
suck.
feel.
Please, everybody take care of your bodies. Don't get hurt because you don't wanna be in a neck brace. They're awful.
Really, really don't. Oh my gosh, they're so uncomfortable. It's like it's one of those things where I think and I've heard that it is more difficult to diagnose TS in girls. That's something that like because a topic of conversation. So I think that might have contributed to it. Because like we went to all these different doctors and we were never really able to get a solid answer until going to a neurologist like 4 years later. So seeing how it
Yeah.
evolved over the years was, you know, significant.
No, it's true. And I hope this is something we get better at with like diagnosing TS and ADHD in girls and across different communities. Because yeah, I mean, so much of the research on it and like presentations that doctors were trained on is like little white boys. And ironically, though, even I like as a little white boy, I still had. I think I was ultimately diagnosed by a neurologist. We did the whole like pediatrician to ear, nose, and throat doctor to some
Yeah.
specialists at the Children's Hospital in Chicago to whatever. And then eventually it was a neurologist that diagnosed me. I find that they, just in my experience, they were that was kind of where the buck stopped. It was like, all right, you have Tourette, and then the neurologist said, let's watch your symptoms for a year and make sure they wax and wane, yada yada. And then I got the diagnosis. But it's tough, and I think getting an early diagnosis is important, and getting the right diagnosis is important, especially with co-occurring conditions and stuff where, people could have different things and we don't always know what it is that's going on, but like that early intervention is key. So 8th grade, you got the diagnosis, and anything that came along with that, did you like speak to your classmates about it, work with teachers for course adjustment? Were there any kind of like life changes you made at that point?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think honestly, probably the biggest life change was more psychological
Mm,
because I think prior to my diagnosis, I was just like, what is this thing about me that I can't explain to other people? That's so weird that I can't control. It became this like big thing in my head because I felt so isolated. But once I had larger language to ascribe to it, it was honestly a lot easier. I didn't feel like this outsider anymore. I was like, there's a community of people, a large number of people were experiencing the same thing. So I do think it was really beneficial with that respect. And then of course there are like the practical things. Like I started working regarding getting accommodations, sometimes taking tests in a separate room, like different things like that that were really just helpful for my tics and navigating my own anxiety surrounding it. And
Can I ask
then
a question about testing accommodations? My thought is, I did this a little bit in like middle school, or actually some in high school too, would like go to a separate room for testing. And it was tough because I knew I needed the accommodation and my tics were bad and stuff, but it was so embarrassing, like to just
Mhm.
leave my classmates and then have to, it forced a disclosure a lot of times because my friends are like, hey, where's Mike? How come he's not in the classroom? Like, where did he go? And now I have to disclose, and wasn't, I'm like an 8th grade kid just trying to fit in. And I was not always trying to be like, Mr. Michael, the Tourette advocate. Like, let's teach the world about Tourette. Sometimes I just wanted to be a kid. How did you navigate that? Was that a challenge for you in terms of like going to a separate room, or maybe not? I am just so curious to hear what your experience with that was like.
That's a really interesting point that you bring up because honestly, I don't think that part was as difficult for me because I think I went to a school where that was pretty normalized. Like it wasn't
Mhm.
super uncommon for people to have accommodations and go to another room. It didn't really feel super
Okay.
significant. But I do think the aspect of like forcing a disclosure in a certain respect can be very, very difficult. Cause I remember, especially when I was first diagnosed, even though it brought like that whole like psychological relief, like I mentioned earlier, I definitely was like so insecure and nervous about talking to other people about what I was experiencing. And I noticed that, and this is like a privilege and a result of the environment that I was in, but I felt like once I explained it to people, life got a lot easier and like I
Mhm.
wasn't getting like the weird looks anymore. It was like, oh, Jenna has TS, and then like that we move on with the day. But I think at the time I was just so in my head about it and like further, I didn't want to make myself like even further this like strange thing, I just
Yeah, yeah.
I felt so insecure about it that I think any environments that felt like they forced me to talk to people about it before I felt fully ready to were pretty difficult.
Those are tough environments. No, I agree with that. And the one point you made I want to highlight because I relate to it too is that like when people know what it is, that tends to make things easier. And not always, some people are just jerks, but I find that like people tend to ask questions or whisper or gossip or even bully when we don't know what's going on, like when you don't have an answer. Cause it's weird if you like see someone doing something and like you don't know what it is, like you just don't know what it is. And I think just having the label Tourette, it kind of answers the question. Oh, that's what it is. That person has Tourette.
Mhm.
And that alone just gets it kind of cuts through the like ambiguity of what is this mysterious gesture this person's doing and thing that they're saying with their voice. Now you have an answer. So if you're still going to judge them and be rude to them, now you're just not a nice person. But a lot of people will be like, "Oh, okay, they have Tourette." Like that's all. That's it's like something changes in your brain, and then it like makes sense. So I think there's a lot of benefit, yeah, in disclosure, and but of course it needs to be in an environment where you feel you can feel psychologically safe to do that. You feel empowered to do that, not feel like it's being forced on you. An important thing here is building community around yourself, building friends who are supportive and understand what you're going through to the extent that they can, but that they're supportive and they're there for you. I'm curious to hear how you handled this, telling the people around you, disclosing, and how you told people to react to your tics.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that's something that took a bit of time to develop and figure out what I was comfortable with and it was an interesting process. I remember I think that was like most heightened in my family because I think I would most like my tics would be most prominent around the home. And my parent we don't know anybody consciously, anyone else in our family who has Tourette. So that's not something that they were very aware of how to navigate before I was diagnosed and before I had it. It was kind of interesting because they'd, like, approach it very different ways. I remember my dad specifically could not quite figure it out where, like, I used to have this thing where I'd, like, tick on the car ride to the school, and my dad would, like, reach over and he'd, like, hold my hand. He'd be like, "It's okay, babe. We're gonna get through it." Start stroking my arm. I'm like 14. I'm trying to listen to 21 Pilots, whatever I was doing at the time. I was like, "Dad, stop." So
Just
I
let me live my life, Dad. Let me pick. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's interesting, and people like people to react to their ticks in different ways. I think for me, and the way that I've communicated it to my family and my friends is just like it's normal. It's just part of conversation. You don't necessarily need to respond to it every time. But also, and this is against a very personal choice, but I think
Mhm.
for me, like some of my ticks are funny. I think like I
Oh
have
yeah.
like right now where like I'll be sitting around with my roommates and then I'll just like tap one of them on the shoulder and go, "You're a lesbian." And like every once in a while you can laugh at that. It's fine. We can laugh. It's
Right.
okay. So I think also just making folks know that like I'm comfortable and like I don't expect anyone to be rude, but you don't have to like overly police your reactions because I think that can also make things more uncomfortable if I'm
Mhm.
being most straightforward about it. So I think just letting people know I don't know, it's one of those things that folks don't know how to navigate, and sometimes they're nervous to start a conversation around.
Yeah.
So, I think once I figured out that I could extend the olive branch and I could start the conversation,
Yeah.
like, it's okay and talk through it, I think that was really helpful.
That was a huge revelation for me too, was like that I could be the one and probably I should be the one to extend that olive branch and be like, "Hey, like you can laugh at my ticks if they're funny, or we can like make jokes about this because you guys are my friends and I know you get it." And like because I think, yeah, growing up I had a complicated and evolving relationship with my ticks. I guess I still do. It's we're going through life and it we evolve. But I definitely had periods where it was just kind of like I would tell people the bare minimum, I would disclose, and then I was actually okay, like, talking about it if you asked me a question, but I didn't volunteer it. I wasn't gonna bring up my tics. Even if I had a bad tick day, I'm not gonna be like, "Oh, man, I'm my neck's aching, my tics are bad." I just wouldn't. It just wasn't really something I thought about. Tics were just kind of something I did and just a part of me. But I think my friends and circle, especially I noticed this some in college too, 'cause it changed by the end of college, but earlier on, I just noticed people, even my friends who knew I had tics, they didn't talk about it. They just kind of matched and mirrored what I did, so if I didn't bring it up, they didn't bring it up. And I'd be having a really bad tick day, and, like, they just didn't acknowledge it, and I guess I kinda liked it, that's kinda how I set it up, but I realized over time that, like, I could have had a more natural, like, kind of genuine, authentic dynamic around my tics, like, I could have created an environment where my friend said, "Hey, your ticks are like pretty bad today. You know, just checking in, you know." And like by senior year, we had that dynamic because I did start talking about it more. But I think what I learned was that it's really in our power to kind of shape that environment or at least do our best to. If here I was in like middle school and high school thinking, oh, if I just tell my closest circle of friends that I have Tourette, that's all I need to do, then word will get out and I'll never have to disclose again, just whatever. And no, like it didn't work out that way. I told my closest group of friends, and because it's a confidential topic, it's sensitive, it's a medical condition, they didn't want to talk to anyone about it. They didn't want to spread the word. So, if someone was like, hey, why is Michael doing that thing with his face? Like, my friends would just probably say nothing. Anyway, long story short, I learned that as a person with Tourette, I had a lot more control over the narrative and just control over the environment than I realized I did. And I think owning that helped me feel a lot more empowered, as opposed to like being in middle school, high school, where I just felt like I was kind of getting through the day to day and not really like owning my Tourette in a way. I was just kind of like, oh, I hope they don't notice me tick. Whereas now it's kind of like, so what if they notice?
Yeah.
Um,
I've seen that evolution show up in my life as well, and it's interesting because I feel like it even goes beyond, like, the friends and family conversation, like, it's something I think about now when I start, like, internships or jobs.
mhm.
I had never really thought about and maybe I should have, I definitely should have, but I hadn't really thought about how that would manifest in the workplace, and I remember I, like, started an internship recently, and I just decided, and again, it's a personal choice, but I let my boss know, I think, on, like, the first day, and I was like, "Just so you know, I have Tourette's, this is what it can look like," and just because I felt like it would make me feel more relaxed and it would make
Mhm.
feel more comfortable if I just let them know ahead of time as opposed to, like, I wait till I have a significant take and then I'm like, "Oh, by the way." So,
Yeah.
I thought I don't know, I thought that was, like, a nice conversation to start as well because then they're given the opportunity to ask me questions of, like, how should I respond? And how
Mhm.
I think it's one of those things that, like, it starts a dialogue and it makes you feel more comfortable sometimes if you have that.
And that's huge. Just we disclose as much for the other person as we disclose for ourselves. Like it helps us too when we disclose, like creating that kind of environment. Internships and jobs is such a. I'm glad you brought that up because that's been, I don't know, just something I'm still reflecting on because I mean, so much of it depends on your team and the nature of your work, but I have varied from disclosing like on the first day to also I've had jobs where I disclose like a month into the job, depending on the person in the team. And yeah, I always felt better afterwards. And I also felt a sort of sense of like deeper camaraderie with my colleagues after I like disclose because it is sharing something that's kind of vulnerable. It's a deeper topic about ourselves that we share. So I actually was always grateful when I did it, but I think the timing of that is up to the person, and that can be kinda tricky to navigate because I also didn't wanna be like, "Hi, it's day 1, I'm the new guy, I have Tourette's." Like, I don't know, at least get to know me a little bit more or something else, and then I'll drop the T-bomb after that, but, like, yeah, so but then if I'm, like, nervous because 'cause I'm taking on the first day, now it's like, "No, I should disclose." So, a lot of things can impact this, but I just wanna underscore the point that, yeah, disclosure really can help you a lot and just make you feel more comfortable too with your boss or colleagues and peers.
100%. Absolutely, absolutely.
So you are not the only one in your family with tics. I'm so curious to hear what that dynamic is like. TS in the family, do you trigger each other? Do you support each other? Do you both? Do you what is that like?
Yeah, yeah. My little sister Raina also has Tourette, and it's really interesting because her tics developed like quite a bit after mine. Like I want to say I was like in late high school before she started experiencing tics. And honestly, I think the first reaction, I think my parents were wondering if she was just mimicking me. Like I think that was just the automatic assumption. And then like they noticed over time, like, no, it looks like Raina has CS too. And it's interesting. I feel like I've learned a lot from watching her, honestly. Like she
Yeah.
that little girl's my role model, I swear. Because she is
Oh.
17 years old and she does a lot of like major public speaking events. She's a huge leader in her community. And I've seen her give these speeches in front of like hundreds, sometimes thousands of kids. And what's so empowering is that our Tourette like sort of manifests differently where I'm at the point in my life where unless I'm either like very, very stressed or very, very calm, you're probably not going to see it. So like
Mhm.
classroom, a person might not know. But my sister's tics are a lot more prominent. And you'll see her and like she's standing in front of this big stage of people and giving this powerful speech, clearly like very educated, knows a lot about the topic. And she has Tourette and she's ticking.
Yeah.
Things don't negate each other. They don't contradict each other. They can just both exist. And she can be beautiful and powerful and have tics at the same time.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
it has been like honestly an inspiration to me to watch her like take up these spaces and embody these spaces and be very successful and that not be a detractor.
That's beautiful. That was so well put. Yeah, no, your sister's great. I had the privilege of coaching her at the Tim Howard Academy, and we'll be back there this fall again as a coach. But yeah, it's always interesting hearing these cases of Tourette's in the family. So I have three siblings, and two of them also have a Tourette diagnosis. But what was kind of interesting for us was we're like the perfect salad bar analogy, where like we each have very different presentations of it. We each got different co-occurring conditions. Our tics are all different. So like I'm very pure, like pretty pure motor tics and ADHD. For like my siblings, they have more like the anxiety or OCD, depression, like the other co-occurring conditions, and then more minimal tics. But it's always interesting too because yeah, parents, you think once you get one kid with it, they're like ready for it and like they know, but every case is different. And so then you get like a younger sibling who has it and they might not get diagnosed right away. Or yeah, you might not notice it because they expect it to be like Jenna's tics, but it's not because Tourette is idiosyncratic. Yeah, it just makes it's an ongoing, not challenge, but just an ongoing thing that families work on, I guess. Did you guys find anything with each other, being sisters, with Tourette, that kind of helped you guys just be better as siblings, supporting each other? Any kind of tips that you can offer to others that have, siblings that have TS?
I think in response to that question, I think in some ways, and I don't know if I don't really qualify this as advice, but just as a reflection on it, I think it has brought us closer together. And it can be one of those things where you get to see how different people can navigate and communicate about their Tourette in the world. Cause I know that like my sister's a lot more extroverted than I am. And I also embody spaces in like where she has strength. Sometimes I sort of can have room to grow, and where I have strength, sometimes she has room to grow. So it's interesting also to see like how we navigate the world and can like give each other advice on like this is how I'd like talk about my Tourette's to this person if I'm going on a first date and the guy and I have a tit like this is how those types of things, those types of
Yeah.
conversations that you might not automatically think to ask, like it automatically creates a safe space where you could have those conversations.
It's also very empowering to see your sibling do things that maybe you didn't think you were gonna do, or that like you wouldn't be as comfortable doing. It's like, oh, well, like my sibling can do that, I can do that too. It just somehow makes it feel like, oh, it's that path is trekked. My family, we've done that. I can do it too. Like it's sort of, I don't know. I found that just growing up with, so I was the third of four of us kids, and having two older siblings was nice because it kind of, I don't know, by the time I got along, it almost felt like there were more options kind of just available because I got to see what they did, that, extracurriculars they joined or classes they took, whatnot, paths that they went. And it kind of, I don't know, emboldened me, I think, just seeing what those opportunities were that they could be. So random question here, but I understand that you have a hobby and it is Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. Would love to hear a little bit more about that, especially how you got into it.
Oh my gosh. I feel like I'm not qualified to speak on Brazilian Jiu. I'm so novice and so not good at it. But I just started as like a little hobby. I think my sophomore year of college, where I think I would needed like a bit of an empowerment. Like freshman year was a little difficult, and I was like, I'm gonna try something that makes me feel strong and
Good
powerful.
for you. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's definitely been an on and off.
Did it work? Is it like is it a good, like, I mean, running
Honestly,
martial
feels
arts,
strong.
self-defense, I imagine is very empowering. I haven't done it, but
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things. We're also, I don't know, I'm one of those people who I think for a long time I'd only pick things or like really lean into things that I knew I was going to shine at. Like I was always in like
yeah.
debate clubs and all that stuff. Cause I'm like, this is my thing. And if I was bad at something, I'm like, I'm not going to touch it.
Oh, I hate it. I don't want to do it. Yeah. Yeah. It's like, no,
Exactly.
I know it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think these last few years have been like an intentional foray into like, okay, I may not be amazing at this thing and we're going to try it anyway and we're going to see how it goes. So I think
Wow.
it's been healthy, like psychologically for that reason.
That's some amazing growth that taking on those things that you weren't going to do, taking on the things that are challenging that we might not thrive at or might not be amazing at. You mentioned about a couple times about service being very core to who you are as a person. And I think you implied that it kind of came like through your family and like the way you were raised, doing service, doing good work, and being an active member of your community. I would love to hear you elaborate on kind of what that means to you and anything that you have to share on how that got instilled in you.
Yeah. I think it's just a response that I just have like such a caring, loving family that's been very rooted in service as like a practice, like a non-negotiable since I was a kid. Like it came through both of my parents are members of the Divine Nine. So like the Omega Psi Phi fraternity and Delta Sigma Theta sorority incorporated. So I like grew up going to like their events and seeing all these amazing things that they were doing in their individual communities and all these programs they were starting. My dad is, I think, just starting a new nonprofit focused on like sort of like a freedom school education type model. Like I grew up around people who are so focused on giving back to their community as a part of their spiritual practice, cultural practice. Like that's what they do. And it's just a part of life. And I think I also just personally like a mindset that I try to reassert for myself is I think part of the reason why we're all on earth is just to make life a little bit easier for the people around us. So I think it's just one of those models that also influences the day-to-day decisions and how I try to show up for my roommates over there or for like my family members or for my friends or just it's one of those things that I think is a really important grounding philosophy that I've been grateful to grow up around people who very much so prioritize it. And it's also I grew up in a faith family that's very religious. My mom's Muslim, my dad's Christian. So obviously those faiths look different. I think it's also a part of their belief system there.
No, it makes sense. And I think a takeaway I'd give to people is that like service can come in many forms, and I think doing the one that feels natural to you is a good place to start. I think we tend to take on our what our parents do. I mean, I remember like being a little kid, I was like a grandma's boy. I would like she lived a couple houses down, so I'd like run across the cornfields of Indiana to get to her house and like hang out with her. But my grandparents were super religious. They were very Catholic. And I remember we'd go to like there's like RCIA and like things that like to help people convert to Catholicism, or she ran like a soup kitchen and stuff for the community. And I remember that was just like a very natural way to start getting involved in service was like doing work through the church. And then, got a little bit older and my family, we were a big scouting family. So we did like Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts and lots of volunteering through that and service work. And it was kind of like, for me, it always just felt very natural. It was just kind of like, this is kind of always been a part of my life. My parents volunteered in the schools. It was just sort of a given that like you have your job as an adult, but you also have like your service to your community, your civic responsibility, your, whatever else. But I think what was cool about the way my parents raised us was that like it was always very open-ended on what that could look like, and it was kind of like do something meaningful for you that's still giving back, whether that's through faith, whether that's through whatever your passion, like Tourette work being a great example. I want to talk some about confidence building. You strike me as someone that is well put together and confident and assertive, and we love all of that. How did your confidence develop? And I'm sure that this is something that, it's not like just you woke up with it one day or it was like innate. Can you share a little bit about how you built confidence growing up, especially as a person with Tourette?
Yeah. It's something I really, really struggled with for a long time. Like I was very insecure. I think especially in the years when I had Tourette's, when was having tics and wasn't diagnosed, even like through high school. I think it's something that I've always really struggled with. And I think college has probably been the biggest like coming into confidence phase for me. And I think that's shown up in like multiple different ways. I think some of it might just be the brain developing and like just
It's so
something.
true. Yeah,
Yeah,
that helped.
life experiences, and I like thinking about this a lot, like, in this last year, I think a lot of my confidence coming from competence and feeling like I'm and able to honor the words and commitments I make to myself, and I show up for myself, and I care and prioritize myself, and I think all those things can be very strong confidence builders, so whether that's, like, journaling, whether that's I think some of it can also take place in, like, these sort of side passion projects that I do, like, I was able to create this, like, leadership program that I had been, like, dreaming about doing for a long time, and I finally was, like I think maybe in my sophomore, junior year of college was like, it's going to happen, I'm doing it this year, and we were able to make it happen, and I think seeing something that starts in your brain and can manifest into something really impactful in real life, that definitely brings a lot of confidence. Because I mean, like, since the intro to this was talking about the roads, I think there's, like, some sort of, like, surface level, like, "Ooh, like, fancy people say I'm smart, that's fun," and you can get, like,
Right.
confidence boost from that, but I do think, like, the most significant confidence has to come internally and from showing up and loving yourself and not waiting for other people telling you that you're worthy, which I think is something that I struggled with for a long, long
It's
time.
hard to do. Yeah.
Especially when we're, like, in high school and all those phases where everything is so much focused on getting other people to like you and approve of you, whether that's the college you're applying for, whether that's the kid you think is cute, whether that's, like, the friend group that you're in, like, so much of life feels so determined based on how other people are interpreting you, and that's something that, like, sometimes it doesn't ever entirely go away, but I think pivoting how I orient my competence to be more internal rather than external has been the biggest game changer for me.
Yeah, it sounds like, one thing you've done with that is just making that deliberate choice to focus on yourself, your needs, whether that's like through journaling you mentioned or like having passion projects on the side. It's like making a conscious, deliberate effort to prioritize that stuff. Sounds like goes a long way.
Yeah, and also just being part of your community and showing up for people that, like, you genuinely love and genuinely love you. Like, it doesn't always have to be self-motivated, but I think like, removing that, like, external approval aspect of things can be really significant.
No, that makes sense. You mentioned your sister being more the extroverted type, doing the public speaking, Tourette to hundreds or thousands of people. Is that something that you do? Because I know you were a Tourette advocate as well. Have you grown in that space, or are you now someone who enjoys doing those big public speakings, or kind of what's your relationship to that now?
I mean, that's something I've always done as well. Like, I was a big debate kid growing up. A lot of like, that was something that was always like my niche, but I would often feel more comfortable with a script in front of me or memorize.
Yeah.
Like having a conversation with somebody, I'd be like, was the kid at the birthday party with the book in the corner. Like, that was just how I operated for
You
a.
can be more rehearsed when you've got the script or the book, and it like you can control it more, I guess.
Yes, yeah, I liked things that I could control, to be quite honest. And yeah, I think that's a space that I've grown in. I think that also comes with the confidence and also just like I think de-stressing has also helped. Like I feel like I don't put as much weight on every single little interaction, every single little grade, just like showing up to class and participating in class because I love to learn rather than I need this specific outcome. Like all of those things have really, really impacted it.
No, that makes sense. Oh yeah, what debate event did you do?
Oh, okay. I wasn't in, like, the official what's it called? The National Speech and Debate.
Forensic or Speech and Debate
Yeah.
Association, yeah,
I
I know
wasn't in that one, but I did mock trial throughout high school,
Oh, okay.
and I did this thing called National High School Ethics Bowl. I think that's, like, the official acronym, which was really big at my high school in New Jersey, and it's, like, a niche activity, and I think of it as, like, very polite debate, like, both sides can take the same opinion, and it's more evaluated based on the quality of the questions you ask and the arguments you deliver rather than, like,
Oh, interesting. Like
interrupting the other
a
person.
winner or yeah.
Yeah, which I do think, like, to this day has really influenced how I think, how I speak, how I show up in the classroom, how I process, like, day-to-day dilemmas, so I think all of those things were very much so influential, both on, like, how I, like, perform in public speaking settings, but also just in terms of how I process information.
No, it's huge. I was a big speech and debater in high school. I did like in Douglas debate and a few speech events, and that was like my big thing in high school. I would stay after school every day for it, and and it was also like our high school was really big for that. We had over 100 kids in our speech and debate program. It was like bigger than our football program, and a dedicated coaching staff. It was amazing and just a great way for that. I think I developed a lot of empowerment and confidence, but also your point about like even now how I approach arguments or my thinking and stuff, I think it's really shaped like how my brain works logically, thinking, making a structure, but even like just getting up and giving a speech is a lot easier, I think, having had some like training in that. I always do recommend that to people that have an interest in public speaking or are curiosity. It's a really valuable activity to do. Some kind of mock trial or UN model UN or debate, I think is excellent for young people to get involved in. One thing we haven't spoken about as much is anxiety. And I honestly don't, so like I don't have like generalized anxiety disorder. It's very minor in my life. And I find that it doesn't come up much in my podcast episodes. I would love to have a little more content around that, especially with people that have faced anxiety and kind of grown through that and what their experience has been like, things they've learned. If that's something you can speak to, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't know the specific information that would be helpful to give on it, but I have generalized anxiety and then I also like I have started experiencing panic attacks pretty severely. I want to say like my sophomore year of college into my junior year of college and they definitely like decreased, but like that's something that I definitely navigated. And yeah, it's interesting. It's one of those things I don't it was kind of funny. I don't know if this is like a relevant anecdote to share, but I remember I got diagnosed with anxiety like when I was in Mississippi, like I guess a couple years ago. And I just had like it was very clear to me and the people around me definitely that I was experiencing it. I remember like I called to tell my mom that they diagnosed me with anxiety. She was like, "Why?" And I told her all the symptoms and she's like, "That's not anxiety. That's just like life." And then we realized
Mm.
like, oh no, she has anxiety too. So it's one of those things of like, I think there's also just, and it can show up in different like cultural contexts and how prevalent conversations around mental health are in your individual communities. But I think it's also relevant to, I don't know. I didn't even know what the full takeaway of that is, but it's interesting to see how those things manifest. And you just might not notice because it's so normalized in your family.
That's a good point. Anxiety really is, and a lot of us that are anxious maybe had anxious parents or maybe not, but a lot of us did. And yeah, and so you just kind of like accept it and might not get diagnosed or even see it as like something that you can actually like work through and work on and stuff like that. But love that. Well, any last tips or advice that you have for someone recently diagnosed with Tourette? So, say someone who was diagnosed at, in eighth grade, having a really significant bout of tics, then they got their diagnosis. What advice would you give them, or what would you tell them?
I think as cliche as it sounds, it really is all gonna be okay. It will be fine. And just remember that there's a whole community of people out there who are experiencing the same thing that you are, that will love you and show up for you. So just it's gonna be all right.
Love hearing that. It is. I echo that as well. Jenna, thank you so much for being on the uptick, and I wish you the best of luck in your final semester at Duke and at Oxford next.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Have a good one. And to our listeners, stay tuned for our next episode.
Thank you for listening to The Uptick, brought to you by the New Jersey Center for Tourette Syndrome and Associated Disorders, empowering you to stretch the boundaries to live your best life.